So I'll just introduce, this is, I guess it's hard for people sometimes to orientate themselves because all the windows and doors are closed up, but if you had been around the outside of the building, that's the front door behind you, and you would have arrived into, this would have been the biggest open space in the castle, which was a beautiful space. There was a gallery around three sides and three beautiful windows up here. The windows that are up there, or what remains of them, are the only original windows in the building, so they're from probably 1820s, and the wood is so amazing at that time that those windows will be restored and are fine, you know, or what remains of them, you know. It's very good pine from huge trees at the time, you know. So for a while we were trying to figure out where the stairs fitted in, but you kind of expect that the stairs would be in the entrance hall. In this case, it's fairly unique in Ireland that the stairs is down here to our right in the round tower. So it's a spiral stairs about 3 metres wide in the round tower, which must have been a beautiful and amazing experience. So there would have been a groined dropping ceiling here coming down to the corners, plasterwork or painted, you know, a lot of probably dark wood around, you know, a lot of furnishings. There's in your own time, if you look at the inventory here, that's later now, that's 1930s or 20s or something. McNacuddy time, there's a list of contents of the hallway there, but it gives you an idea of the amount of stuff that would have been in these places. And some of the furniture there's oak carved furniture and stuff. That, we reckon, is from much, much earlier. There's references to that in the Coatsman's letters. So you'll see over here, there's an interesting poster there, which is from one of the Calum films, which were filmed in Killarney around just before the 1920s, I think. So Flesk was used in several of those. One or two of those survive. Some of the ones that Flesk was used in don't survive anymore, unfortunately. So that's a lovely poster that would have been used in America there for that particular film. If I just jump onto these letters here now, these are the Coatsman letters, and I'll let John talk about the letters in a minute, but what I love about getting, the interesting thing about Flesk is that sometimes you go to mansions and stuff that have been there for hundreds of years, and there's a box of documents, there's leases and drawings, and there can be too much stuff. But in the case of here, there was nothing, so we just had to start. There was very, very little, you know. So sources like this, the Coatsman's letters, which he was writing back in the 1829 up to 1840 or something, from his travels in Europe, they're really great because, again, you have this easy idea of a romantic castle, that everything was perfect, they had the money to make it perfect, but it kind of shatters that. And it's the same as any generation. It rains in Kerry, it rains a lot, there's problems with roofs, water, whatever, rates. So even though this jumps between, sometimes he calls it, you know, I wish, what is it, there's a reference to my chateau in the clouds, that he's, I need not tell you that he's writing to his sister, who's out in Milltown, I guess, married to Godfrey. I need not tell you that my chateau in the clouds is very much and always at your service, and my sister's, if in the absence of your noble hosts, you should take it into your heads to come due south in search of either health or pleasure at Killarney. So, in a way, there's that idea of the chateau in the clouds, but you have some amazing, I suppose, instructions and problems and works here that are written down, which are very, very accurate about certain parts of the building. So if snow falls in any quantity, Falvey should go on the roofs and shovel it off. He should take Coonahan with a wooden shovel. It seems very simple and there's not much to it, but the reality there is that the flat roofs were timber roofs, originally covered in lead, which, I mean, that kind of technology, getting that to work over a long period of time, there was always problems with them, you know. So there within that, there's a concern about the weight of the snow on the roofs and the problems that was causing. Coonahan must take a wooden shovel, because if he takes anything metal, it'll damage the lead and cause problems. So, yeah, there's various ones there. It's talking about the sunk fence, the that was 1832. Is no progress made in the sunk fence yet. If the wall is not allowed to be a full 6 feet to the surface, have nothing to do with it, for you know that sheep in Kerry are not to be kept out by a fence less than that. there's talk here 1835. I suppose you can kind of see when work was happening and he'd been concerned about not letting people into certain areas of the building because they're not perfect and finished, So as far as the crack-brained Sergeant Falvey, he never tells me how the clover in front of the hall door is coming on. Please to tell Falvey to lock up the hall door of the castle, and if any person rings for admittance, to answer at the wicket. The wicket was a gate into the courtyard just beyond the hall. The stupid old man had no business to receive the Miss Herberts at the hall door. Tell him I wish the key to be locked up. The Miss Herberts were, I think, two sisters that lived down, I think, in Killarney on the Muckross Road. So whatever went wrong, the place wasn't it wasn't ready to accept them, So it probably wasn't finished. And this is quite an important one. It just shows you the contrast between Chateau and the Clouds and what you see here, the reality of challenges. I wish to impress upon William the absolute necessity of reducing every expense at the castle. For this purpose, it is my wish that when you leave the castle, the house may be shut up, that not a sod of turf be burned in it through the winter, all servants to be reduced and discharged with the exception of Falvey, who, if he chooses to inhabit the kitchen and servant men's room, may do at a reduced salary. And an interesting one here, I won't make any comment on it, but my wish never was that Falvey or anybody else should exclude strangers from the place or the inhabitants of Killarney. I only desired that they might be prevented poking their noses into dirty, unfinished corners or entering the castle to criticise its furniture, etc. Which is nice, actually. The current owners of the castle, it's important for places like this, which are long-standing history and heritage, that they're not hidden away. And that's a very nice thing about this project, that regardless of what happens, the history is being put back together, and that you'll see articles and stuff coming together over the next year, presenting this and giving it back to people, because it was very much lost, So some drawings here of our surveys of the windows. We've done a lot of feasibility work on the renovation, pricing windows, detailing windows, drawing there of some, there's huge repairs that need to be done on the front where half of the front stone cladding was presumably knocked down for building elsewhere, so that's a big job that has to be done. John might tell us about the Coatsman letters as well.
In case you're wondering where the Coatsman letters are, they're part of the Godfrey collection. The Godfrey family lived in Milltown until 1959, and they moved to Aunaskall, and they lived in Aunaskall until 1972, and then a cousin inherited the letters, and they're still in Kerry, so I've had access to them. So these letters were written by the Coatsmans back to the Godfreys during the 1820s and 30s. And they're quite unique because they're the only record we have, that I know of instructions back about how a castle should be built, how a domain should be laid out, what flowers should be planted, how the lawn should be cut, what furniture should be used. So they're a fascinating record. In actual fact, as we go through the castle, we can actually see some of the things that were instructed to be done in the 1820s. You can actually see them in the wall, which is quite amazing. But in terms of the castle itself, as I say, what we do know is it was built in sections. So the original end of the castle was here. And all this section here was built on in the 1820s. So when you go into this room here and you look up at the very high, you see a blocked window. So when they built this bit of the castle on, they had to block up the window. So there's very little clues like that let us know when the castle was built. You'll also see, I mentioned earlier, how they cut the wood off in 1944 to bring it to Ahadoe. And you can see here as well the original floor height of the castle. So you would be higher than what you are at the moment. What's quite interesting about the castle is it adapted this notion of what's called an enfilade. Right? So even though the castle was built in stages, there was this concept behind it all that it was going to be this grand house. Now, if you go through any major country house in Ireland or any country house in Britain or in France, every one of them had what was called a grand enfilade, which was a grand sequence of rooms, and you progress from one to the other. So as you came into the castle, this was the grand entrance hall. You proceeded into the anteroom. You proceeded then from the anteroom on to the octagon room. And when we get to the octagon room, then you see the grand enfilade out the front. There was a small drawing room, large drawing room, and dining room. As Carol has mentioned, unusually for an Irish country house, which often had huge, large, very imposing staircases, this had a small circular staircase. And again, it reflects the fact that the castle was built in stages. It was never intended to be a grand country house, say like Muckross or Killarney House. It was only built really as a summer residence. So that's why it doesn't have those grand features that some of those other houses have. What we also know is that I'm pretty certain at this stage that the architect of the castle in the 1820s was this man called James Chambers. Now, he's very little is known about him. He was based in Tralee. He died in outside Tralee in 1830s, but there's references to Chambers drawing up plans of the castle, executing works of the castle, and so on. And what's quite interesting is if you're at Globe, if any of you are familiar with Ballyhigh Castle, where the golf course is, the entrance of Ballyhigh Castle is almost identical to the entrance of this castle here. So what they were doing is they were taking bits and pieces of different castles they liked. And the style of the castle evolves. So you have one style at the front, and as the castle moves this way, there's slight variations in the style of the castle. And unless you're an architect who knows Gothic architecture inside out, it's not really obvious. But there are discrete changes. What's also quite interesting is they use what was called trompe-l'oeil. Trompe-l'oeil is fake painting on the exterior of the castle. Now, I have never seen it before in Ireland to such an extent. So when you go outside the castle again and you are looking at the front of it here, if you notice the round tower, you'll see the plasterwork is painted to emulate stonework. And they did that when they were plastering the castle. The plaster was still wet. They applied various shades of ochre to the plasterwork. Now, the only place I've ever seen that done anywhere else in Europe is in Russia and in France. Now, it must have been applied in other houses in Ireland, but I've certainly never seen other examples. So if you stand back and you look at the castle from a distance, it gives you the impression it was built of cut stone. But in fact, we know it wasn't. It was built of rubble. So it was a bit, as I say, this art of illusion was there all the time. The castle was meant to look grander, more imposing, stronger than it actually was. But effectively, it was a very fancy summer house. So it was. Okay?
Yeah, well, just one nice memory from here before we move on. There's some people who were, as children here, I suppose, children of some of the farm workers and stuff. On Christmas Day, all the workers on the estate were brought in here to the hall for Christmas dinner, which was a lovely gesture by this is MacLecody's in the 1930s, I guess, or towards 1940. And Nicholas's father, Anthony, would appear on the gallery up here out of maybe the back room here, dressed up as Santa Claus with a sack on his back, and would, I suppose, go down the stairs and reappear then, you know. And there's also, I suppose, they'll have a big table laid out here. Lovely memory. At that time, you know, he saw some photography and stuff. Anthony MacLecody was very into early photography and video, and he would put on a show here, projecting onto the wall of the video he had taken. So that was very confusing to children and young people at the time. And one woman has told me of sitting here, seeing Anthony MacLecody on the wall coming down the garden path, and just trying to figure out how could that be when he's just beside me here, you know. So just some lovely memories from those kind of events. So we'll